Have you ever read Psalm 51? It's a powerful psalm, a prayer of repentance, and it was written by King David, the second king of Israel. But do you know the backstory? Psalm 51 is based on the prayer for repentance because of the things that King David did. The story starts in 2 Samuel chapter 11, and it gives us the details of what's going on. So it opens with, it was the springtime, and it was time for kings to go out to battle. But David sent the armies of Israel and General Joab to go out and fight the Ammonites. But he remained in the palace. And it says he woke up from one of his naps, and he was walking on the roof of the castle, and he looked down, and he saw a woman bathing. So he sent a servant to ask, "Who is that woman?" And the servant came back and told him, "That is the wife of Uriah, Bathsheba." So David sent for her. It says he brought her to the palace, and he slept with her, and then she left. A little while later, Bathsheba comes back and tells him, "I'm pregnant." So the king is now wondering, how am I going to cover this up? How am I going to make this go away? So he sends a message to Joab, the general of the army. He says, "Send me Uriah the Hittite." So he sends Uriah the Hittite to King David, and King David says, "Hey, how are you doing?" He meets with him. He says, "How's the war going? How are the men doing?" And then he says, "Well, why don't you just go home now and relax and eat some food and go spend some time with your wife." And then Uriah leaves. So David thinks everything is going to be fine, hoping that if he sleeps with her and when the baby comes, that he will say, "Oh, this is my child." But to David's disappointment, Uriah doesn't go home. In fact, it says he slept with the servants in front of the palace and wouldn't go. When David found this out, he sent for Uriah again. He says, why didn't you go home to your wife? Why didn't you go relax and eat at your house?" He says, "How can I do that when my brothers are still in the field, sleeping under tents and doing battle? I will never do that." So David says to him, "Come over later and we will have a meal together, and you can leave the following day." So David brings him up to the palace, and he has this meal with Uriah. And he gets him drunk. And he's saying, oh, he's going to end up going home and sleeping with his wife because, he's going to be drunk. So he sends him home, and to David's frustration, Uriah does the same thing. He sleeps with the servants in front of the palace. So David comes up with this idea. He's going to resolve this. He writes a letter to Joab, the general of the army, and he gives it to Uriah to take to him, a sealed letter. So Uriah doesn't know what's in his hand. And the letter was to put Uriah in the fiercest part of the battle, and then to pull the troops supporting him back. So this is exactly what they do. They put him in the battle, in the most fierce fighting and everything, and the men draw back, and Uriah is killed. So then Joab sends a letter with a messenger telling him, "We were in a battle, some of our men have fallen, and Uriah is one of them." And when David receives this news, he feels relaxed. He says, "Okay, things are good. My plan is working." And it says that once the news got back to Bathsheba, she mourned her husband, right? And after the mourning, what did David do? David brought her to the palace and made her his wife. Now, listen to what the last verse of 2 Samuel chapter 11 says. It says, "But the things that David had done displeased the Lord." David thought he got away with something. So time passes on, and then verse 12 of 2 Samuel gives us more details of what had happened. So David thinks he got away with it. He thinks that now that he's married Bathsheba, that all things are settled. But God sends the prophet Nathan to King David, and he says to him, "Hey, let me tell you this story. There was a rich man and a poor man." Now the rich man had lots of cattle, lots of sheep, and the poor man only has this one little ewe lamb, and he would the lamb would eat out of his plate and drink from his cup, and he would cuddle with it. It was like a little daughter to him. Some traveler came to visit the rich man, and the rich man, instead of taking a sheep from his flock, he takes the sheep from the poor man, he kills it, sets it up for the visitor, and he gives it to the meal. And then when David hears this, he gets upset. He says, this guy needs to die. And then Nathan looks at him and says, you are that man. And then Nathan starts reading the judgment of God. And this is the judgment of God. He said that violence would be in the house of David for the rest of his life. Right? And that his wives would be given over to other men, and they would sleep with them in the public. What David did in secret will now be done to his wives in public. And what's sad about this, David was the king, knowing better, did this thing. And he says, you took the wife of Uriah, the prophet tells him. So God wanted him to know that what he had done was wrong. All right? He not only took the wife of a man, but killed him so he could keep her and keep his secret quiet. But God was not going to allow that to happen. Now, after all of this is said by the prophet, David repents. And this is the beginnings of what Psalm 51 is all about. David confesses his sin, and he says, I have sinned against the Lord. And Nathan tells him God has forgiven him. Do not be afraid. God has forgiven him. So he won't die. He will not die. He says, but the child, the baby that was born of that night where he slept with Bathsheba, will die. And so what does David do? When David hears this, okay, he starts wondering, oh Lord, maybe he will be merciful. And it says that a sickness touched the child and he got really, really sick. So David goes into a 7-day fast and he starts praying and begging God to forgive him and to spare the child. God already forgave his sin, but the child on the 7th day died. David gets up from that. He cleans himself up, and they ask him, well, why did you cry and fast for 7 days? He said, well, the child was alive. I had hope. But now that he is gone, I can't bring him back. But one day, I will go to him. In other words, when David dies, he will be where the child is at too. So that's the backstory of Psalm 51. It's about disobedience to God. It's about adultery. It's about murder. And it's about betraying one of his own. Did you know that Uriah was one of David's mighty men? Of the 30 men that it talks about, these were elite warriors that surrounded David as bodyguards and fought in the front of all the battles where David would go. So he does all these things and betrays the trust of a man who was willing to put his own life on the line to protect King David. So that's what Psalm 51, where that prayer comes from. It comes from a point of repentance because he had done something awful, but God forgave him. And some people might say, wait a minute, he did all these horrible things and God still forgave him. But because of his sin, there would always be violence in the house of David. His own sons rise up against him. And one of his sons actually chases him out of the palace and anoints himself king. So that went along the life of David. Always violence, always trouble to the end of his days. But another interesting thing about these events in the life of David is that the woman Bathsheba would give him another son. And that son's name would be Solomon. And he would be the next king of Israel. God had mercy on David, even though he did this. He paid the price, but he had been forgiven by God. So that, my friends, that's the backstory of the wonderful prayer of repentance, Psalm 51. God bless you.